Hello again. Today we're jacking into the Matrix. So the Matrix. I mean, who the f hasn't heard of the Matrix? Bullet time. I know Kung Fu.
I know Kung Fu.
Red pill. Blue pill.
The blue pill. The red pill.
Whoa. Freeze frame karate. A mainstream successful action and sci-fi film made by two trans women.
Wait a minute.
The Matrix is an action sci-fi film written and directed by Lily and Lana Wachowski in 1999, at the time under the name The Wachowski Brothers. It was made for $63 million and it grossed $465 million in the worldwide box office and changed the history of film forever. And I could obviously do a whole video on how influential The Matrix was for the film industry and for CGI and for stunts and go into the whole film production, yada yada yada.
But
I want to focus on the Wachowski sisters.
that's right.
The people who wrote and directed The Matrix are now both out and proud trans women.
Aww.
Now, if you're like a film person like myself, you probably know this, especially if you're a queer or trans like film person. What makes The Matrix so much more fucking cool is knowing that these were two trans women writing a
Secret trans allegory
into their big budget action philosophical sci-fi film. Now, I can't say that Allegory stands up to the two sequels in the Animatrix, but as a trans person who is
obsessed
with The Matrix ever since I saw it air with commercials on cable when I was 11 years old, The Matrix has always had a certain staying power with me. I always identified with the story, and knowing that both of the creators of the film were closeted trans women at the time, it makes the film even more meaningful to me. Let's take the red pill and unpack The Matrix. I'm gonna give y'all a brief synopsis of the movie now, just so that I can delve into the allegory in a little bit more detail. So if you haven't watched the film, I highly recommend that you watch it before you watch this video, because I will be giving away spoilers. Spoilers for the plot. And I'm also going to give a specific interpretation of the film, which for some of you might dull the experience of actually watching the film. So you have been warned. You've been warned. The film follows Neo, or as he's referred to by people in the Matrix and the agents, Mr. Anderson. Neo is a programmer, hacker, overall code dude searching for something. He doesn't feel right. He spends all of his time trying to figure out what's wrong and trying to find this thing called the Matrix. He meets Trinity, who leads him to Morpheus, the man with all the answers. Morpheus wakes him up to the reality of the Matrix, which is in fact a simulated reality created by the robot sentinels that had taken over control of the real world in the year 2199, I think he says. And they use the Matrix as a means to harvest humans for their energy and to keep them complacent. Once he's out of the Matrix, Neo learns about his destiny as the One, and he must basically save all of humanity and defeat the Sentinels. So really cool for him. It's really cute for him. Now let's
trans it up.
The first line of text or dialogue that we see on screen in the Matrix is call trans opt received. And it's also the last line that we see. One of the last lines that we see. Literally, bitch, trans opt receive it. So Mr. Thomas Anderson is searching for something because he feels out of place in his life and in his body, you could say. Mr. Anderson is experiencing dysphoria. He is a trans person on the precipice of understanding. For many trans people, before we are aware of like our trans status, we feel like we're searching for something that's missing. Society does not tell us that transness even exists, and therefore we feel extra lost in life, looking for the key that will unlock the secret that we know is there. Neo finally finds it. Or should I say, Trinity and Morpheus find him. He is at his daytime job, where everyone refers to him by his legal name, his dead name, Mr. Thomas Anderson.
Thomas Anderson?
Yeah, that's me.
He can't be out at work because society is not equipped to deal with him. He can only begin to explore his identity online. And when the agents first find him, they tell him, look, one of these lives has a future. Neo has no future. There is no space for Neo in the Matrix. There is only space for Mr. Anderson.
It seems that you've been living two lives.
In one life, you're Thomas A. Anderson, program writer for a respectable software company. The other life is lived in computers, where you go by the hacker alias Neo and are guilty of virtually every computer crime we have a law for. One of these lives has a future, and one of them does not.
In the early days of the internet, especially of the late 90s and early 2000s, the primary way that people interacted with and on the web was in anonymous message boards and chat rooms. And a very common occurrence was trans people, even if they didn't know they were trans yet, playing with the ideas of gender and bending their own realities. Trans people would, in a way, role play as an affirming gender and interact with people as this other gender and get a feel for what life would be like if people saw them as this other gender. In the online world, in the Matrix, and in the real world, like outside of the Matrix, Neo is known only as Neo, his chosen name and identity that he uses when he is engaging with his true passion for hacking and discovering the Matrix. After Morpheus finds him, he starts to be introduced to their world, not the world of the Matrix, the real world. So Neo is searching for something, and Morpheus knows this, and he points this out to him. He says,
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
This is a perfect sentence that describes the feeling of gender dysphoria, especially before you realize you're trans or before you know what trans is. It's this longing feeling within you of something is wrong. Something's wrong with me or something's wrong with the world because I feel like I'm missing something. And Morpheus says it right to him. He's like, bitch, I know what you feel. It's gender dysphoria. Bam. In the seminal moment of the film, Morpheus offers Neo a choice. He says, you can take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Basically, if you take the blue pill, you stay here, and you'll never know what the Matrix is, and you'll stay searching forever. But if you take the red pill, you will discover the truth about the Matrix.
Did you know?
That in the 90s, the primary form of female hormones that trans women took was a little red pill called Premarin. So quite literally, Neo is choosing the truth, and he's choosing to begin his transition from the Matrix into the real world, from the forced societal role and identity that was manufactured for him by the Sentinels and by the agents of the Matrix, to the real, to discover his true nature and his true self. I.e., Neo is beginning hormone replacement therapy. Yeah.
That's right, bestie. That's right, bitches.
She's got an HRT, girl.
And a quick reminder that you do not have to take hormones or medically transition to be trans. Just in this narrative, despite the fairly one-to-one aspect of the red pill to hormone therapy allegory, you could also just think of this as any kind of transition. It is also a social transition, or you could think of it as a transition of expression, etc., if that's fitting your trans narrative a little bit better. But we're talking about this one, so it's also worth noting. As many of you probably know, that being red-pilled is a term that alt-right and right-wing dipshits have used now. They have adopted to mean waking up from the feminist brainwashing, meaning they took the red pill and they now see the truth that it's actually really cool and edgy to be a sexist and racist piece of shit, which is insanely ironic due to the fact that it's literally a one-to-one metaphor for going on hormones to medically transition into a woman. Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? Hashtag not all Alanis Morissettes. After Neo is awakened in the real world, he not only continues the mental and social transition from the Matrix into the real world, he also literally undergoes a physical and medical transition. Because he has been harvested by the machines in his little pink robot egg, he has never used his body before, and Morpheus and his crew must physically remove the little cyborg holes and beef up his atrophied muscles. And once he is physically able, he can go back into the Matrix and into the training programs that they use to learn more about himself and his identity as the one, as Neo, his chosen name. Also, now would be a good time to say that I've made it very clear Neo has two names. One given to him by the Matrix and his chosen name for himself. Also, everyone in the real world calls Neo by his chosen name, but the agents in the Matrix will exclusively refer to him as Mr. Anderson. Low-key emphasis on the Mr.
Hello, we're trans.
They deny him his own chosen, destined identity in favor of the name that they gave him, his dead name. They basically dead name him the entire film. Something that happens to trans people constantly, whether it's well-meaning family or old peers, legal documents, or places that use legal names like the pharmacy or the doctor's office, and even people with harsh motives who use our dead names to try and hold control over us, just like the agents do in the Matrix against Neo. In terms of the trans allegory, there isn't a whole much more than this in the story, besides like the Oracle maybe telling Neo that he isn't the one until he is the one, basically telling him only he can define who he is, and when he is ready to be the one, he will be the one, i.e. only you can know your identity and only you can act on who you are, which I feel like is totally linked to the allegory. But also, I guess you could read this as maybe even though in this allegory he's already gone through a medical transition, you could also argue that this is maybe medical gatekeeping or legal gatekeeping, and it's saying you have to prove to me, bitch, that you're the one or else you're not the one. Prove to me you're a woman or else you're not a woman. So maybe that could totally be there too, but in terms of the timeline of the allegory, we don't quite clock that there, which is fine. That's still mostly there as like a part of the plot rather than in service of the allegory. And then, Neo obviously becomes the one, defeats the social narrative. He learns it's totally possible to bend the Matrix, i.e. the gender construct.
The gender binary.
And he lives happily ever after and flies off into the distance into the next two movies that aren't nearly as good, but are still fun to watch. Also, the film ends not only with the call trans op, but it also says system failure. And then as we zoom into the computer, we go between the M and the F. Literally between the gender binary, the gender constructs of the Matrix. We are going into it at the very end of the film. Like, we have broken the gender binary, bitch. We have broken society's constructs of what gender is. M, F, who are you? I don't see you. We go into it. One more thing is to bring up that the Wachowskis actually did originally write a trans character into the narrative, Switch, who still appears in the movie as the hot andro cyber butch of my dreams. Switch. But originally, the character was meant to actually, quote unquote, switch genders. That's right. In the Matrix, Switch would present in a female form. And then when you gets pulled out of the Matrix into the real life, they would be in a male form, a male body, which was just meant to reinforce this idea of what is the real and what are the implications of something like the Matrix, where you can project and manifest an ideal of yourself just like you could and you still can on the internet. Maybe both versions are still the real you, or maybe one is an internal reality versus an external reality, or maybe it's just like a projection of who you really are. Look,
I don't know.
there are a lot of interpretations of this alternate version of the character, but
Warner Brothers
thought that would be too confusing for audiences to understand, which maybe in some ways they were right, but I think it would have opened up even more questions about like what is the Matrix and what does it mean and what is transness and what are gender and what is real. What is the real?
Not this.
Anyways, I have always been a huge fan of The Matrix, and being able to read this like overt trans metaphor in the story makes it all the more real for me and for other trans and queer people, because not only is it just like really cool, like I said, I mean, look at me, honey, this is fashion, this is cool, but in a film that did like extremely well and is a huge staple of pop culture, and it has been since its release in 1999, it just shows that queer and trans narratives are more universal than maybe society or cis people realize that they are. Here is this huge philosophical science fiction epic that is also a very clear and precise trans coming out story written by two trans women. And here everyone is in society like identifying with it and continuing to deconstruct and digest it. I think that's just like really one of the coolest things about art and film in general. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna try to make more small videos like this and upload a little bit more frequently. So give me a little like, give me a little subscribe, and absolutely demolish that fucking notifications button if you wanna know when I post a video, because let's be real, even I don't know when. So if I don't know, you sure need to get in the know. Get the bell icon. Absolutely erase that bell icon from the Matrix. Jack in, baby. Okay, bye.